Hey, welcome back to Global Environment. In the last segment, we were talking about a simulation model of the country of Eritrea, and we set up the model, and now in this segment, we're going to look at the results of this model. We're going to look 100 years in the future. And I said this was a spatial model, and the results come out spatially as well. So let's look at it. This diagram shows 100 years in the future of this country. So the white is the outline of the country, and the different shades of green and yellow show for each year where farming or agriculture was occurring. And you can see in 1998, when this model starts, it's mostly in these regions here, and then it starts to expand. It gets farther out, and farther out. The black areas are desert. You can't use it for farming. But this was a big surprise for me. I ran this model for 100 years in the future, and what I found is that this country ran out of arable land by 2007. Big surprise. Now, what's driving this expansion? The first thing, obviously, the population is rising, so that makes it necessary to use more land. The other thing is the quality of land. This area in here has the best land. You don't need as much land in production to get a yield like you would over here. Over here, you might have to put 4 times as much land in production to get the same yield. So it's best first that's driving it. And you can see best first in this diagram too, because it skips areas and then goes back later. So it's being driven by population and the quality of land. Now, the next graph just shows you what the picture showed you, but in graphical form. So this is time, and this is how much land is in production. And you can see by 2007, it's all done. This graph shows over time the amount of food that's produced for different crops. Each color is a different type of crop, and you can see initially this really takes off. More and more land is in production and more fertilizer is being used, but then it stops. And you can see that there's some variation year to year in the amount of food that's grown. And that's because random weather is built into this model. Here you might have a good rainy year, and over here a drought, and everything in between. So random weather is built in. You might also notice that even though this saturates out, because you've used all the land, you've saturated with fertilizer, you still have a reduction over time, a slight reduction. And that is the erosion that is programmed into this model. Now the next slide I'm going to show you is probably the most important slide. And what I do is I take this graph right here, the amount of food, and I turn that into the amount of food, the amount of people that this food could feed. That's the next graph. And that's the pink line we see here. The pink line is how many people you could feed with the food on the last graph. Now, the blue line is if you take the current rate of growth and you extrapolate it for 100 years into the future. And you go from a country of 4 million people to a country of 30 million people. Now, you can imagine that the gap between these lines really represents bad news, people who might not eat. Now, I got to show this model and the results of this model to the government of Eritrea. And I was presenting it to about 350 people. I was kind of nervous. You're hoping nobody asks you questions. But right at the end, one of the guys from the government raised his hand. He goes, "Sir, I don't believe your model. I don't think it's correct. I don't think there's going to be 30 million people in my country in 100 years. And I remembered something that a scientist named Albert Bartlett once said. And I said, "Sir, I agree with you 100%. There's not going to be 30 million people in your country in 100 years because either you're going to do something to slow down this rate of growth, or really you don't have to worry about it because Mother Nature will take care of it for you." He didn't have an answer for that. Now, we can also look with this model at the cost of agriculture over time. It's probably higher than they could ever afford if they were looking for food self-sufficiency. This is energy use over time. This is not sustainable, this rate of growth. It's going up at about 10% per year. They're getting 80% of their energy from biomass. They don't have any oil or coal or anything like that, so they probably can't keep this up. This shows forest land over time. going down very fast. Again, close to 10% per year. By 2030, probably no forest left. So, if we look at the conclusions based on these assumptions, it's pretty much a bleak situation. Now, here's the catch. This is not what's going to happen. There were assumptions here. Even food self-sufficiency is a major assumption. So is this model useless? Not really, because models like this can give you a good idea of root causes and root problems that should be addressed. Obviously, and this model made it very clear, population growth is a major problem here. So they have to address that. Again, obviously, the types of soils they have aren't great for agriculture. Food self-sufficiency might not be an option. So what else could they do? Maybe instead of investing their resources in agriculture, they should invest their resources in manufacturing, industry, things like that, generate foreign exchange money, and buy food. There are other countries doing that. You go with the data. And again, models help you see these more clearly. And again, this model can be tweaked. We can try these policy changes and see how it might affect the future. All right, so, this is important again because we're talking about real people. Real people with needs, real people who need to survive. And, trying to do this in our heads isn't always an option. And simulation models can tell us a lot. So we'll stop there, and I'll see you next time on Global Environment.